In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started using RStudio and R. The first thing that you need to do is open a web browser. I'm using Firefox here, but you can use whatever you prefer. And go to the website rstudio.mobilizingcs.org. And when you get there, it'll prompt you to enter your username and password. So type those in. And if you don't have one yet, you can ask Mobilize support and they'll create one for you. Then you click Sign In, and the first time you open RStudio, you'll see these three panes: the console pane, the workspace, and the files pane. We're going to be using R, which is a statistical programming language. So for the most part, you're going to be typing R commands into the console, but the other material around here is just to support you and make it easier to learn R. The first thing that you want to notice is the Files pane, which should contain all of the ECS data files that are used in the curriculum. So there are different types of data files represented here. So one type is the comma-separated value files. Basically, those are files where the data has commas in between all the different pieces of data. There are RDA files, which are a file type that R uses to store data, and there are robj files, which is a different kind of R data file for storing R objects. You don't really have to know the difference between these types of data, except that they're loaded into R in different ways, so you have to remember a couple different things. But one thing you might want to do is upload some data. Say you had another data set that you were interested in and you wanted to use it in RStudio. You would have to use the upload button and then browse to wherever the data that you wanted were stored and then upload them. I have this file already, so it's asking me if I want to override it, and I'm going to choose yes. So now this file appears in my list of files, and it'll stay here even if I log out. It will be here when I log back in, and I can keep things here. So if you wanted to keep a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation that you were working on, you could upload it right here and keep it along with your data files. Like I said, we're going to be doing most of our work in the console, but as you'll see in a little bit, when you open data, it shows up in your workspace, and so then that gives you a sense of everything you're working with. And you also have this History tab, which shows you the history of all the code that you've ever typed in RStudio. If you're just starting out, this will probably be empty, but as you progress, this will become a useful resource that you can search through using a search bar. This tab down here also has a Plots tab, which allows you to scroll through plots that you've created and to export them as images if you have one that you really like and want to embed in a presentation or a Scratch project. It also has this tab which lets you look at all the packages that you have loaded. You probably don't need to really worry about this, but it's interesting to look at the list of additional code that we've included for you, so you can check that out if you want to. And then there's the Help tab, which lets you look at documentation for different functions. So if you need to learn more about some piece of code, you can look in the Help tab. You can either type some code, some help code here, or you can just search right in the search bar here. Okay, so one of the first things you'll want to do to get started using RStudio is load some data in. And while you can do all of the data loading using code in the console, there are a couple of shortcuts that RStudio includes, so you don't have to do that. So the first type of data that I'm going to show you how to load in is CSV data. So that's the comma-separated value data. And the way you do that is you click on this Import Dataset button and then choose From Text File. Now you get this pop-up and you can look through all of the data that you have in your File tab and choose the dataset that you want to load, and then click Open. Now this gives you a little preview of what the data looks like in its raw form, so you can see a piece of data, a comma, a piece of data, a comma, just like you would expect in something that's called comma-separated values. And then you can see a preview of what it'll look like once it's loaded in. And if something looks wrong here, you can change around some of the options over here, but for this one I think it looks good, so I'm just going to click Import. And now it opens up automatically in this preview window so that you can look through it just like you would in a spreadsheet program. That's pretty good. And if you notice, there's also some code that appeared down here when we did that. So if you'd wanted to use a function to load in the data, you could have typed these commands and the exact same thing would have happened. The next type of data that I'm going to show you how to load is RDA files. So these are R data files, and the way to load these in is just to click on the name of the file. So if I want to load the cdc.rda file, I just click on it, and it asks me if I want to load it into my workspace, so I select yes. And now you'll see a little code happened here, and the CDC data showed up in my list of data in my workspace, but nothing appeared here. So to see the preview, I just need to click on the name of the data, and then the spreadsheet appears, and I can look through it just like the last one. The last type of data that I'm going to show you how to load in are the robj files. And there's no button to do this in RStudio, so we're going to learn a little piece of code. And the piece of code is a function called dget. So with functions, you type out the name of the function, and then you type smooth parentheses. And you need to have a parenthesis at the beginning of the function and one at the end of the function. And in between the parentheses go the parameters or arguments. I kind of use those two terms interchangeably, so listen for those in the other videos so that you know what I'm talking about. So the parameter that we give this function is the file name that we want to load in. We have to give it to the function in quotes, in double quotes. So I'm going to use double quotes. It's automatically filling in the end quote for me, so that's kind of handy. And then I type out the name of the file that I want to load in. In my case, it's weather.robj. And then I'm going to hit enter. So what happened here is a bunch of code, well, data really, sort of spit out into my console window, and nothing happened in my workspace. So this isn't exactly what I want, because since it's just printed out in the console, I can't do anything with it. Instead, what I want to do is name my data something so I can look at it and use it. So what I'm going to do is hit the up arrow. That lets me scroll back through the code that I've entered previously, so I don't have to retype it. And then I'm going to use the side-to-side arrows on my keyboard to get back to the beginning of the line. Or I could use my mouse and just click at the beginning of the line. And now I need to make up a name for my data. I'm just going to call it weather because that's easy, and use the equal sign. So using the equal sign tells R to assign that data to that name. And now when I hit enter, nothing prints out in the console, but we see the weather data appears in the workspace. And now if I click on the name of that, it appears just like a spreadsheet, like the other data. Okay, so now you know a little bit about functions. They have the smooth parentheses, and then in the middle they have some parameters or arguments that you give to them. The other thing that I want to tell you about is the $sign operator, which is probably the most useful thing you could possibly learn in R. For this, I'm going to look back at my LA bike data, and I'm just going to type in my console window LA bike and hit enter. So this is doing just what we saw before. When I tell it the name of the data set, it just prints out all of the data in my console window. So that's a way to look at it if you don't want to look up here in the preview window. But what if I just wanted to get like the list of all the types from this data set? So in this column I have all of the designations of whether it was a bike route, a bike path, a bike lane, or none of the above. So if I wanted to just access that column, and we call columns variables, I would have to use the $sign. And so what I do is I type out the name of the data, and then I type a $sign, and then I type the name of the variable. So in this case, the name is type, and when I hit enter, it prints out all of the information from that column. And it starts at the left and it goes to the right, and it just is reading down this column. So the first one is none, the second is bike route, none, 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 and etc. So one thing that often confuses people are these numbers. What the number is the index, which is the row in the data set. So it's just saying this one is number 1, and then this one is number 8. So let's see, let's scroll over on number 8. Yep, it is bike path. So it's just giving you an idea of where you are in the data set so that it's not just words that are printing out with no context. And the other thing that it's giving me here are the levels. So it's telling me all the possible options for this data. It could be a bike lane, a bike path, a bike route, or none. So that's some good information. And now I could use this variable in some other function. So for example, a function that I like to use is called summary. And again, I type out the name of the function and then smooth parentheses. And inside, I'm just going to give it this variable. So again, I typed the name of the data set, the $, and then the name of the variable. And when I hit enter, it's giving me a summary. So it's saying that there are 5 instances in the data set where it says bike lane, 6 times when it says bike path, 7 when it says bike route, and 20 when it says none. One more useful thing that I want to show you is tab completion. So let's say I was typing out and I didn't remember how to spell summary. I could use the tab and then I could scroll through different functions that start with SUMM, and then it would show me summary, okay, it's ARY, and then I can just hit enter and it'll fill it in for me. And then I do my parentheses and I type out the name of my data set and the $, and maybe I don't remember the name of the variable that I want to put here. Then I can hit tab, and now I can scroll through all the possible variables. So maybe I want a summary of the bike count, and then I can hit enter, and in this case, because I gave it some numeric data, it's telling me the minimum, the first quartile, the median, the mean, the third quartile, and the maximum. So we can see that the biggest number in that whole column is 977. When I scroll down, I can find that right in here. The last thing I want to show you is how to end your time working with RStudio. So my favorite way to do this is to use the sign out button, because that lets me just pick up right where I left off when I sign back in. So if I click sign out and then I sign back in, when I get back in, you'll see that all of my code is still here, all my data is still loaded into my workspace, I have all these previews, everything is just the way it was, and I can just start where I left off. However, occasionally I'll feel like I've loaded too much data in, or I just need a clean slate because I've done too much in my RStudio session. And in that case, what you can do is go to File and say Quit RStudio. So this is going to wipe everything off and almost make it like you're starting over. And it'll ask you if you want to save your workspace image. I recommend clicking Don't Save. And then it'll ask you to start a new session. And when you click this, you'll notice that all my code is gone from my console, although I can still see it in the History tab if I want to. And my workspace is totally empty. So even though I have these previews of the data, it's not actually loaded in here. And again, this is a great way to get a clean slate if you want to start over, but I usually recommend using the sign out button. Alright, so to summarize, what I've shown you in this video is how to log into RStudio. I've shown you the 4 panes, the previewing data pane, the workspace pane, the files pane, and my favorite and the most important, the console pane. I've shown you how to load in CSV data using the Import Dataset button, how to open RDA files by clicking on them, and how to open robj files using the function dget. I showed you a little bit about how functions work with smooth parentheses, and I showed you the $ operator to get at variables or particular columns inside a dataset. And we use the summary function as well to look at some summaries of data. Then I showed you how to end your RStudio session by using the sign out button so that everything is just the way that you left it when you stopped the last time. And I showed you the quit option if you want a totally clean slate. I hope that helps you get started using RStudio and R.